And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Good afternoon. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist John Cowen with your aviation forecast. We'll start off taking a look at flying weather across the state for Tuesday morning. As you can see, IFR conditions present along much of the west coast of Alaska, getting into portions of the central interior, as well as portions of the central and eastern Aleutians. And now that's going to be generally unsettled weather across much of the Bering throughout our forecast period here, with high pressure centered over the Gulf of Alaska, keeping things generally VFR across most of the eastern portions of the state into the Panhandle. Very little change getting into Tuesday afternoon. Still some IFR across much of the west coast. Again, portions of the western Brooks Range as well getting into that IFR, and generally any terrain across the western half of the state could be dealing with some lower visibilities there. Beautiful weather for the southeastern quadrant of the state. However, as we get into Wednesday afternoon, we do have a piece of energy that's going to be moving up across the Aleutians, helping to reinforce that precipitation across the west coast, lowering visibility. So again, we're going to be dealing with some IFR across portions of the central and western Brooks Range, generally looking west of Adigan Pass. And then by Wednesday afternoon, still some lingering IFR conditions across portions of the central and western interior, and then getting into Bristol Bay as well. Otherwise, again, southeastern Alaska, looking at generally VFR weather throughout much of the forecast period. Taking a look at our passes, you can see Anaktuvik Pass. We'll start out the day in VFR. However, we do have some marginal conditions again with weather moving in from the southwest. MVFR conditions towards the southern entrance, so could be some lower visibilities out there. Adigan Pass, generally looking at VFR conditions for Tuesday. Coming down to the Alaska Range, generally beautiful flying weather across this portion of the state. VFR weather for Lake Clark and Merrill passes. Rainy Pass VFR as well, same story, windy. Isabel Pass, coming down to Mentasta, VFR weather there, VFR in Sonita, VFR in Portage, and making this whole forecast pretty easy for me, VFR weather in Chilkoot and White Pass. And then we'll take a look at freezing levels now. As you can see, most of the state, again, as you might expect for February, most of the state is going to be below freezing as far as surface temperatures go. However, we do have some warmer temperatures across the Aleutians. You do notice there are some warmer layers above the surface, however, due to our high pressure system here over the Gulf of Alaska. Freezing levels up to about 6,000 feet over portions of South Central and Kodiak Island. Taking a look at our icing forecast, with that weather moving up over the western portion of the ridge, we do have some icing concerns. Some occasional moderate turbulence is expected, generally from the surface up to about 8,000 feet over the western Brooks Range, up to about 6,000 feet over the eastern Bering. And then over the western Bering, western Aleutians, freezing levels are generally going to be above 2,000 feet to possibly have some of that moderate icing. And then taking a look at our jet stream. So we do have some stronger winds aloft across a good portion of the state. Generally westerly winds in that 65 to 75 knot range. Some pretty strong winds over a fairly large area. Over the Panhandle, things kind of turn back around, so you can see the general flow pattern here. Looking at clockwise flow, so coming down to the Panhandle, going to be northerly to northeasterly around that 75 knot mark. And then coming down to 9,000 feet again, so Panhandle's looking at northeast winds generally around 50 knots or so. Over the interior, we're looking at 40 to 50 knots, again, generally out of the west. And then down to 3,000 feet, we do have a core of stronger winds near Barter Island up in the eastern Arctic slope there, up to 50 knots at 3,000 feet. Generally 35 to 40 knots or so over the western interior and west coast. And then towards the southern Panhandle, northeast winds again around 45 knots. And so, as you might expect, that is where we would expect to see some turbulence. Surface to about 5,000 feet for some occasional moderate turbulence over the southern Panhandle. Over the northwestern portions of the state, surface to about 4,000 feet. And then over the central Aleutians, we're looking at about surface to 4,000 feet for some occasional moderate turbulence. And that'll wrap up our aviation forecast. I'm meteorologist John Cowen.